All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Dave Anderson, and I serve as chair of the Master's Level Psychologist, Licensed Clinical Psychotherapist Advisory Committee of the Kansas Behavioral Science Regulatory Board. I ask the members of the advisory committee to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that is being conducted remotely by conference call and other electronic medium. Donna Hunter-Queel is not able to be here. Shelley Duncan also not able to be here. Rebecca Jabara.
I'm here.
Thank you. Lauren, is it locked?
Yes, I am here, and great pronunciation. Thank you.
Well, I'm batting 500. Iris Pauley.
Here.
Josh Tangway.
Here.
Kari, is it Wold?
It is in here.
All right. I had messed up Kari's name earlier, so. I note the following BSRB staff members are also present. David Fye, Leslie Allen, and Ashley Van Buskirk may be joining us on and off. Next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
This is David Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or COMA, does not require the advisory committee to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals, but individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the executive director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. There will be no public comment at the meeting as no individuals requested to provide public comment. Because we are conducting this meeting remotely by conference call and other teleconference ability, I state for the record the following information. Public access to the meeting is being conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and on the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is being conducted remotely, the requirements of COMA are not suspended, so we'll be conducting this meeting pursuant to the COMA. On October 20th, 2021, we sent notice of the advisory committee meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of advisory committee meetings. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at the website. An agenda and other meeting materials was posted to the board's website prior to the date of the meeting. You may also request a copy of the agenda by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and the YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if there are any technical issues during the meeting, you may contact the board office, and right now, based on our remote work, for most of our staff, we ask that you send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of the meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link in the meeting agenda that has been posted to the website.
You're on mute, Dave.
So go back and reread that. The meeting's now called to order, and the advisory committee will begin its discussion of the first item on the agenda. Did everybody get a copy of the agenda? All right, I'm going to start with item number 3, approval of agenda or additions to the agenda. Are there any additions? If not, I would take a motion for the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Next, we'll do a review and approval of the minutes from last time we met on August 17th. Everybody get an opportunity to review those. Any changes, additions to the minutes? If not, I would accept a motion to approve the minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
Josh, you want to second since you were the only person?
Second.
Here. at that time.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
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 Next, we have the executive director's report, but Dave, can we just switch that and do introductions first?
Sure, that would be fun.
All right, let's start with existing members, and then we'll move to our new members. I'm Dave Anderson. I am the chair of this group. My day job is I'm the director of clinical programs for High Plains Mental Health Center. We cover the 20 counties of Northwest Kansas. Been on the advisory committee for a few years and been on the full board, I think, 2 years. Josh?
Hi, everyone. I'm Josh Tangway. Welcome to the board. Excited to have you all here. I teach at Fort Hays State University, full-time instructor, and I've been in private practice for about 5 years, after about 5 years of working in patient psychiatric. So nice to meet you all.
Iris?
Hello, I'm Iris Polly. I work as a clinical director at South Central Mental Health. We provide services to Butler County. I am.
I think we're getting a little bit of
Also,
feedback from
yeah.
Dave's audio, but let's try it now.
I'm the clinical director at South Central Mental Health. We serve Butler County, and I have been here with South Central for 22 years. And I also am a registered play therapist supervisor. Welcome, and I look forward to working with you guys.
I'm going to try to remember to mute and unmute as I do this. Rebecca, you're first on my screen, so please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, my name's Rebecca Jabara, and I'm in Wichita. I'm working a couple of different positions right now. I started a private practice a few years ago after I got my LCP, and I'm doing that part-time. And then my other part-time gig is with the Wichita schools, working doing mental health evaluations and doing some testing for USD 259.
Great, well, welcome.
Thank you.
Kari?
I'm Kariwold. I am the clinical services supervisor with an organization called Integrated Behavioral Technologies. We provide ABA therapy for kids and adolescents from central Kansas into Missouri, and from the Oklahoma to Nebraska borders. I also help oversee and run the diagnostic clinic. So we provide diagnostics for individuals who need it. So
Great, welcome. Lauren?
Thank you. I'm Lauren Lucht. I'm the executive director of mental and behavioral health for the University of Kansas Health System. So that means I support all things behavioral health within our organization, to include inpatient, outpatient services, and the rest of our continuum of care.
Very good, thank you. Dave, do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. My name is Dave Fye, and I'm the executive director for the BSRB, and I'm coming up at the end of my first year with the BSRB. The previous director, Max Foster, retired back in January, and we had the chance to work together a little bit before he retired, but it's been a very busy year, and I'm very excited to welcome all three of you to the advisory committee. We've communicated a little bit over email, but it's nice to be able to put a face with a name, and look forward to working with you all more over the next few years. So.
Hi.
Likewise, thank you.
Sorry. I'm Leslie Allen. I am the Assistant Director and Licensing Manager for the BSRB. I have been with the board since 1999 and look forward to meeting with you. Excuse me.
Very good. Thank you all. And again, we appreciate your willingness to serve on this advisory committee. And with that, Dave, we'll move back to item 4, the executive director's report.
Sounds good. So generally, at the advisory committee meetings, I provide a report on any items that affect the agency or any recent board activity or items that would be relevant for the advisory committee. So put together a few different items just for your advisement. In terms of items affecting the current state of the BSRB, back in August, late August, after the advisory committee met last, we received direction from the governor's office to have state employees return to primarily working from home. We are still asked to keep the office open, so we have a limited number of staff here in the office, but most of our staff is working remotely on a day-to-day basis. And so that has been a challenge, but we are moving forward with it. It was initially through the end of October, and that has now been extended until January 3rd. So we'll be continuing that at least until that time. We did go ahead and pick up some additional electronic equipment to help our staff be a little bit more efficient while working from home, and we're still working out some logistics with some of the technology, but overall, I think it's going pretty well. Another item for your attention is currently we are working on some of our structural logistics for licensing here in the office. We can do renewals of licenses through an online system, or we still have a few that do paper, but primarily those are now being done electronically. So about 90% of renewals are being done through the online system. But our initial applications, we are in the process of moving those to an online system as well. As part of that, we are moving forward with a electronic payment system, which should make our payments be able to be processed more quickly and more securely. We are hoping to have something in place by the end of next week, but that's been a recent development we've been working on for some time now, but it looks like it's going to be able to be something we can move forward on here real quick. So it's going to be really exciting. We are also in the process of hiring another licensing specialist / administrative assistant for the office to help us out with clerical responsibilities and also on the licensing side of the office. We had a staff member resign a little bit ago, and we haven't been in the process of advertising and interviewing candidates for that position. I think we'll have to re-advertise the position to get a bigger amount of candidates. And as you all are aware, there's some difficulty right now in terms of finding applicants and hiring individuals, but we're going to be moving forward on that. In the meanwhile, we are looking to bring in some temporary staffing to help out with the licensing responsibilities so we can keep moving on those quickly. In terms of some items affecting the board, there is a new member of the advisory committee from the board as a public member. That's our new board member, Donna Honer-Quill. Donna has been added to the board since, I believe, your last meeting. And she is going to be a public member on the Master's Level Psychology Advisory Committee and also on the Social Work Advisory Committee. And she is from Pratt. And so you'll enjoy meeting her when she's at the next meeting. In terms of the advisory committee membership, one of the things we've been working on here in the office has been assisting almost all of the advisory committees with receiving materials and reviewing applicant submissions to join the advisory committees. There have been several new members that have been added over the course of the last few months. The last of the advisory committees made recommendations yesterday, and that was for social work. They had 30 applicants to review, so they kind of broke it down into a couple meetings, but they did reach recommendations yesterday, so they'll be moving forward with those. Additionally, the last board meeting was on September 13th, but since that time, generally sometime in September, the board has an annual planning meeting, sometimes referred to as the board retreat. And this year, because of the COVID-19 variant, the board was not able to meet in person as the board usually prefers. So it was going to be an electronic one-day meeting. The board decided to break that into 2 half-day meetings. And so the first was on September 27th, and the second was on October 25th. And during those meetings, the board reviewed a number of different items and had good discussion on different things, such as minor updates to the board's website posting policy, some major revisions to the board governance policy, discussion on meriting the public trust as a requirement of licensure, continuing education requirements in diversity, equity, and inclusion, allowing master's level practitioners and other professions to test for a licensed addiction counselor license, records of deceased practitioners, and many other topics. So those meetings were very active. There was a lot of good discussion, and the board was able to move forward with several of those items. Because of all the work of the board recently and to allow the staff to have sufficient time to move forward on all the items the board has been meeting about, the chair of the board did go ahead and cancel the November board meeting. That was going to be this coming Monday, but currently that meeting is now canceled. And so the next time the board will meet as a full board will be in January. The board usually meets every other month on the second Monday of the month. So that will be the next board meeting unless something comes up on an emergency basis where we'll have to bring the board together for a quick decision. Based on all of the items the board had worked on, we're moving forward with some language for a bill request from the legislature and also some language for revisions to the regulations. Another item that we're going to be working with the board and the advisory committees on is to create basically a sheet of public attendee information. We don't have a lot of individuals who attend our meetings from the public and request to provide public comment. But recently we did have a group wishing to contact one of the advisory committees, and there was a little bit of confusion regarding what topics they could discuss and what topics might be better suited towards potentially a complaint against a practitioner or report of alleged violation. And so in my previous position, I had worked for the legislature for about 8 years, and the legislative committees, they have documents that they approve in each of the committees that basically provide guidance to members of the public in terms of how the committee will operate, and then what the expectations are of public attendees and some of the topics that are germane to those committees. So I'll be working with the chair of the board and the chair of the advisory committees to come up with maybe a public attendee informational sheet so that they can we can go ahead and move forward on those and maybe post some of those to the board's website so that members of the public have a better idea of sort of how the public comment might work, or if they attend our meetings, sort of a general guidelines for them. And then just the other item I wanted to touch upon is over the last month and a half, Leslie and I have been very busy working on a number of items. But one of the fun items is that we've had the opportunity to speak to some groups of students. Unfortunately, those were not able to be in person this year, but we've probably had about 5 different presentations to different levels of students who are pursuing degrees in the fields of the professions overseen by the BSRB. And we've had some good questions from those groups. And so that's just one of the things that we want to make you aware of, that, you know, we do try to reach out to individuals who are in the profession, but also those preparing for the profession so that they have general guidelines about things like licensing, discipline, and other matters. So with that, I'll go ahead and end my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Did we just lose Rebecca?
I believe Rebecca did drop off. I'll keep an eye on the waiting room, and if she pops back in, add her back. So.
Thank you. Did anybody have any questions for Dave about his report? Unfortunately, Shelley Duncan had something come up at work and is unable to join us today. We were going to recognize her years of service to the advisory committee. Shelley's been a member of this particular advisory committee for well over a decade. And I had sent her an email indicating we wanted to recognize her and her years of service to bettering our profession. And unfortunately, we can't do that. But one of the things we should touch on is length of service on advisory committees, because that's something the full board had just dealt with. My understanding, and Dave, you jump in if I say anything incorrect here, but advisory committee members serve for 2 years and then are able to continue in 2-year increments up to a total of 8 years. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, in the past, the firms have sort of run together. The board governance policy does indicate that the terms are 2 years and you can have as many as 4 terms. So one thing that we've been working on over the last year is trying to sync up and kind of clarify some of those processes. And one of those is that we're trying to keep those running closer to a fiscal year type appointment. So when you received your information The term ended essentially on June 30th or July 1st. So that way we can sync it up more with the start of the fiscal year in terms of the years of service. But the board did clarify at the recent annual planning meetings that they wanted to go ahead and keep that at the 2-year terms and a maximum of 4 terms, so a maximum of 8 years.
So we had a number of people on this particular advisory committee that had served for very long periods of time. And so we've been doing a little bit of kind of cleanup on that. We had a number of people who had been willing to serve, and we just had not kind of been following our own policy. We did add Iris and Josh not that long ago, right?
It was about when David Fye came on, I think. So about almost a year.
And then with a couple of other people retiring off of this particular committee, we did our outreach, and that's how we were fortunate enough to come up with the 3 of you. And again, we appreciate your willingness to serve on this committee. Much of what we'll do on this committee will be, some issues will come directly from the board. So issues will come to BSRB and the full board will discuss that, and then it will seek input from the advisory committees. So that's part of my role as the representative from this group to the full board, is to bring those back, solicit your feedback, and then take that back to the full board for future discussion. A couple of the items we're going to discuss in the old business are issues that we have discussed, as well as the in-residence issue in new business. Also, we take any issues you all might bring to this group. If those need to then go up to the full board, then again, that's part of my job, is to be the conduit of input from this group to the full board. So as we talk about different topics, always feel free to bring up issues that you have an interest in or concerns about. As Dave mentioned, part of what we do is kind of continue to review our own internal processes to see if we are kind of keeping up with how things should be done, and also taking feedback from our members and people of the profession who have questions or issues that we might be able to help with and address. BSRB's primary mission is protection of the public. And so oftentimes, we'll get contacted by people who are in the process of applying, and they've run into some kind of snag with their application. I always try to refer those people back to BSRB staff. I'm glad to kind of bring that to the attention of BSRB staff, try to be helpful for those folks, but primarily, our mission is protection of the public. So sometimes people are coming to us wanting help getting licensed. It's also important to note, and this has come up several times recently at BSRB, that we are not able to make any modifications outside of what's written in the statutes and regs. And so even if through no fault of the person, they have worked hard and gone to school and graduated and done everything they thought they were supposed to do, if there is something about their particular educational. Some people coming from out of state where the university's program doesn't meet all the specifics of the Kansas regs. So there may be some things that BSRB staff can do in terms of talking with them about the things they'll need to do to make up those deficiencies. But there are often some very technical aspects to the language in the regs and statutes that we have to follow. And so even though we may be very sympathetic to an individual's situation, we as members of the BSRB are not allowed to say, geez, that seems unfair, so we'll let this person get a license. We have to do what the regs say. Now, every year, one of the things the BSRB does is puts together a legislative agenda where we look at some things and say, maybe there are some adjustments that should be made to the regs. And Dave puts that together from input from the board, and then we work to get those changes made in statute. Even that doesn't always go the way we planned. And Dave can talk a little bit more about this, but we introduced some legislation last year, and then a legislator changed some of our language without our input, and then what ended up getting passed was not what we had submitted. But again, once it gets passed and written into law, we are beholden to follow that. And it's one of the great strengths of Dave's, his background in dealing with the legislature, that being able to move those things forward and make sure people really understand what it is we're trying to do and why, to again make it so that we're practicing in a manner that protects the public, but also allows the most people who are appropriately trained get licensed. And so it's really kind of a balancing act for us. Dave, anything more you want to say about that?
I think you covered that really well. And I think probably would be a good time right now for me just to add that, as you heard me talk about at the beginning, and also you heard from your chair, doing these meetings remotely, we have certain things that we follow, like the Kansas Open Meeting Act or COMA. There's also things that fit under the Kansas Administrative Procedures Act or CAPA. And so as this is an open meeting, generally sometime in the spring, there's a little bit more of a training for advisory committee members or board members. Last year, we had legal counsel for the board, which we received through the Attorney General's office. They came out and attended each of the advisory committee meetings and provided some guidance in terms of your responsibility and role as an advisory committee member, in terms of avoiding things like conflict of interest and those type of responsibilities. But I think for right now, one thing I would just let you know is that we really appreciate your work on the advisory committee. There are limitations on what you're able to do outside of a meeting. So I just kind of wanted to make you aware of just some high points we talk about from time to time. In terms of your discussions about advisory committee business, you want to both basically try to have those in an open meeting as much as possible. One thing you need to be careful of is you don't want to have a majority of the committee discussing committee related business outside of a meeting. So you can always talk to me. We have different guidelines based on us being staff. So if you have any questions, you're always free to reach out to me. And you're able to communicate with one member or two members. That's not really an issue. You want to be careful not to reach the point to where it's a majority of the committee. So if you need to reach out to me or Leslie or even Dave as the chair, that's not something you need to be worried about. You just need to keep the majority of the discussions about advisory committee related things here in a meeting. But in terms of the other different things to watch out for and other responsibilities, we'll probably see if we can get a similar training for the different advisory committees sometime in the spring, because I think that was some helpful information. And in the meanwhile, if you did want to check out some of that information. Those are all up on the BSRB YouTube channel back from the meetings. I think most of those occurred at the February meetings of the advisory committees. So it is kind of a lengthy training. It takes about an hour. So, but I just want to make you aware that's a resource for you. And just the COMA thing is that one of the items I get questions about from time to time. But as Dave mentioned, I did spend several years over working with the legislature. So I'm familiar with the way that they do their processes, and we do things a little bit differently just based on the rules that they adopt versus what we use. But if you ever have questions about any of those type of things, or whether something is appropriate to do outside of a meeting or inside of a meeting, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to be a resource for you, and really excited to that you're volunteering your time and that we get a chance to work with you in terms of the advisory committee.
Thank you, Dave. One thing you'll notice sometimes is you'll get an email from BSRB staff, Dave in particular, and it will indicate in the email only to respond to him. And again, that is designed to protect us from it not appearing like we are having communication as a group outside of a public forum. All right, let's move on to old business unless anybody has any questions. And please feel free to ask questions. Well, we have been, as you all have as well, dealing with COVID and trying to figure out how to continue to do the work of BSRB while not meeting in person. And we've all probably become way more familiar with the Zoom environment than we ever thought we would or hoped we would. Dave, you want to give us a little update on where things stand with the state currently?
Sure. So in my executive director's report, I mentioned that the governor had directed state offices to have most employees working from home, or to support operations still here in the office, but to go ahead and have employees working remotely as long as they can do so effectively. One of the other guidelines that we were provided was to avoid having in-person meetings unless it's absolutely necessary. And so that's one of the issues with us meeting remotely versus in person. And so with Zoom, and the BSRB YouTube channel and the conference call we use, we're able to provide access to the meeting without being in person. But I think based on the guidance about, limiting the number of in-person meetings, we'll probably have to move forward, at least at the moment, with doing most of our meetings, if not all of them, remotely. And then if we get direction from the governor's office that we can begin meeting in person again, then we'll communicate that to you. I think there had been, back earlier, I think around June, that's when we were advised to have employees return back to the office full time. And things were looking a little bit differently, and there were discussions about, consistently, how do you want to move forward with in-person meetings or remote meetings or some sort of a hybrid. But under the current conditions, I think we'll have to move forward with the Zoom meetings. And then if things change, we'll let you know. But hopefully things will change soon. But we'll just have to be cautious and make sure to try to do what we can to keep everybody safe.
Thank you, Dave. I really am a fan of, and hope we can have an in-person meeting at least once a year, just so we can get an opportunity to really kind of meet each other face to face. There's always time before meetings where people really kind of get to know each other and develop some connections and relationships, which I have certainly missed from doing Zoom meetings. But certainly our priority is to keep people safe. And I know you're all busy, and we want to be good stewards of your time as well. The second issue was around a ongoing discussion at BSRB about a proposed requirement for continuing education hours in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So the licensed psychologist group brought that to the full board, and the full board took that back to the advisory committees. This committee talked about that issue on several occasions, and our feedback to the full board was we did not think it was necessary to include a requirement for that. Ethically, we talked about how people really shouldn't be treating groups, populations, individuals that they were not properly trained for, that's already should be a part of how people think. And if there's going to be some requirement for them to do that, there's generally educational opportunities. We also talked about looking at something more broad, like a requirement for training in special populations, which could include really any group. And one of the examples, so out where I live, we've had a pretty strong push into the agricultural workers, and a big part of what we hear from farmers and people who work in farm-related industries is that they don't think mental health staff really understand what their livelihood means to them. Sometimes they are struggling to keep a 5th or 6th generation farm going, or they don't understand what it is to be a farmer, what that looks like in the day-to-day scheduling of their time. And so we have reached out to get a training. Of course, many of our staff members come from those kind of families, so that's kind of second nature to them, but not everyone. And so that was one population. We're also looking at getting some training, as we have a growing Hispanic population in our area, to make sure that our staff are aware of cultural and treatment issues specific to that population as well. So the full board decided not to require a training on diversity, equity, and inclusion. But Dave, am I right that the licensed psychologists are going to change their particular requirements?
Yes, so there's generally a preference for the professions to kind of do the same thing in general, but there are certain differences between the professions, and there was a recommendation from the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee to move forward with requiring it, and they even came forward and said if they're the only profession, they still would like to move forward with that. So that was taken to the board, and they were asked if the board had, essentially would allow them to move forward for that profession, and the board did not object to that. So that is essentially a consensus of the board to allow that to move forward. So that is something that will be put in the draft bill for the legislature. And so they are moving forward with that for the licensed psychology profession, but the other professions didn't come forward right now with a recommendation to change the continuing education requirements.
So you made a really good point. I want to circle back to, which is, and Leslie will certainly agree that BSRB staff appreciated when the professions do things in as similar a way as possible. It just makes their lives easier if there's not a bunch of small but technical differences between the groups. Would that be fair to say, Leslie?
Yes.
As they are processing both, initial requests for licensing and renewals, they either have to have specific staff trained to do specific professions and know exactly what they're looking for, which then gets you into that issue of what happens if you lose those folks. But it's better if the professions are more similar in terms of the kinds and types of CEUs or the amount and type of supervision required. That just makes their jobs easier. Not to mention, it allows for some consistency so that when we talk about our overall goal of protecting the public, we have similar standards for each group. Anything more you want to say about that, Leslie?
No, I think you said that very well.
New advisory committee members, do you have any questions about that?
No, thank you.
All right. We'll move on to new business. And our first issue is around the in-residence requirement. And I believe you all got some information in your packet that Leslie put together that really discusses what those words mean in each of the different professional groups' licensure requirements. So Leslie, you want to walk us through that?
And Dave, before I begin, I just kind of wanted to add something. So for some of the new members, you may not be familiar with some of the difference between statutes and regulations, but I thought I would just talk about that for a second before we begin.
Perfect.
Statutes and regulations are really what the BSRB is asked to follow. Statutes are essentially law. They are the product of bills that go before the legislature. And then when those bills move forward and ultimately are passed by the legislature and they go in front of the governor to either be signed into law or move forward, in a different way. But that's essentially the bill is passed and then it goes to the governor's office. And when those things become law, that gets either added as a new statute or it amends an existing statute. And so that's really where the statutes come from. So anything that would need to be changed in statute would really need to be in a bill form to go before the legislature. But the statutes sort of lay out the broad framework of the requirements and responsibilities of the BSRB. However, a lot of those different requirements or directions in statute need to be fleshed out. And the process to do that is to use the regulations. And the regulations follow a different process. They basically, you have language which breaks into more detail or clarifies some of the requirements that are broadly defined in statute. And the regulatory language is not something that goes into a bill. So it allows the agencies to work on these. And in this case, some of the regulatory language or potential regulatory language, the advisory committees can be asked to review and submit recommendations. Then the board can also look at regulatory language or make changes. And then the way that moves forward is a little bit differently. There's a review by the Division of Budget's office, and there's time for public comment. But then once that is all effective, then it just is changed and it's added to the new regulatory language for the agency. So the handout that you did receive, that's a copy of different regulatory language as it relates to the different professions. And so just wanted to clarify the difference between statutes and regulations. So what you see in front of you is regulatory language that could be changed without actually going through the statutory process of having a bill.
Great, thank you, Leslie.
So what has come up is we've had several people address the board and ask for basically for in-residence language to be lightened or removed. And it was put in regulation about 20 years ago, and it hasn't changed since then. And master's level, so I'll read what master's level psychology in residence, when used to describe a student, means that the student is present at the physical location of the institution for the purpose of completing coursework during which the student and one or more core faculty members are in physical proximity and face-to-face contact. So I would say you're breathing the same air. And so the addiction counselors have a little, theirs is looser. And that was done because they had online programs before they even started licensing. When they were just an apps credential, they were allowed to complete online programs. And so it was kind of a hard thing for them to change and do so much in residence. Theirs is in residence when used to describe the student, means that the student is present at the physical location of the institution or at any other location approved by the board for the purpose of completing coursework during which the student and one or more core faculty members, adjunct faculty members, or agency internship supervisors are in face-to-face contact. So they still require the face-to-face contact, but where it can take place, like it can take place at the practicum site, is different, and it's face-to-face, not necessarily all at the institution with core faculty.
And Dave, it may be helpful if Leslie just talked for a second about what she sees in terms of applicants and how the in-residence language plays a role in looking at if somebody meets the qualifications for licensure.
There's just been a lot more, part of the problem with master's level psychology is there's no professional accrediting body. So it's just the regulation, where other professions have, like APA. So if they're APA, their program's automatically approved. And then if not, they have to meet the regulation requirements. And yours does not have that option. So there's no allowance for any online programs, even if they meet a higher standard than most. And we have had many applicants who cannot get a license because they come in and they've done an online program and they had no, they were not at the location, even if they met places and did the, I don't know what they call them, their residencies. They aren't at the location of the institution. And so they're not allowed to get a license at all. And there's no recourse, there's nothing they can do. Their education just doesn't meet. And unless they get a new degree, they can't become licensed in Kansas.
So a large part of this issue has come about because of online programs.
Yes.
All the programs, within the state obviously understand what the BSRB criteria are and have, developed their particular programs to meet those. What happens is that there are applicants who generally have pursued degrees from online programs. And some of those online programs are such that students really never step foot on the actual campus. But they often do get together regionally. So they may come together for 2 weeks at a large hotel and spend time at a conference there and meeting there with supervisors and taking classes and doing trainings that fit within their program. But because it does not meet our regulatory language of the in-residence, then they are unable to get licensed in the state of Kansas. Now, I will say in a couple of these situations, I was glad that I was there, because we've had some folks who've gone through programs that were, for example, they did a testing, and when we talked to them about what that testing class looked like, because one was an assessment of children, and they had all met at a hotel, and they had adults pretend they were kids so that they could give, whiskars and other child-related testing instruments to people who were pretending to be kids. That to me was not the same thing as, regardless of whether they had done that on campus or not on campus, is really what we expect people who are going to be providing that kind of a service to have learned in their educational process. On the other hand, these online programs we know are becoming more popular. We know that there are non-traditional students who aren't able to, not work and be full-time students going on campus. And so it is, again, one of those balancing acts between protecting the public from people who aren't adequately trained, but also in a different way, protecting the public by making sure there's an adequate number of people available to provide, appropriate mental health services. So we wanted to talk about what you all think about the change in language to what the addiction counseling group has, which really adds the line "or at any other location approved by the board." Is that right, Leslie? Is that the kind of additional piece of information?
Yeah, and that it could be, the face-to-face contact can be with adjunct faculty or agency internship supervisors. Neither one of those are included in yours.
Okay, so throw it out to the group. Anybody jump in and just provide some feedback?
So I think I get and understand the increase in influx of individuals who are now doing online programs. And there are a lot of benefits to that, but having gone through a program that was on site, there's a lot of chance for remediation to occur when it's on site. So if you have someone maybe who is a little bit uncomfortable initially working with client facing, situations, it gives the chance for the professors to provide feedback. But as even in my own program, it gave the chance for people who came in thinking that's what they wanted to do and then decided that wasn't the best fit because they actually got that face-to-face, forward-facing experience. They decided it wasn't best fit. And when it comes to not only financially spending your money to attend school, that's not a bad thing for them, but when it comes to the people we're going to be caring for and providing services to, that's also crucial that we have people in the field that are invested and who are ethical in practice and feel confident in, setting boundaries and those types of things. And I think the chance of missing that, unfortunately, with an online only program is relatively high. So those are my concerns about switching it to, where there is no extended period of face-to-face.
Very good, thank you. Others?
I share some concerns about an entirely online program, and I'm trying to conceptualize the idea of a couple of meetups at hotels to do the in-person portions that you literally can't do virtually, like administer a test. I suppose there's potential where an amazing practicum experience could give a candidate that experience before they're licensed, but I'd hate to be relying solely on the practicum and not the education itself to be sort of that in-person time where you're making sure you can cut it and ethically.
Rebecca?
No, I completely agree with what Lauren and Kari have said. It's concerning, and I get that online programs are becoming more popular, and it makes sense. But the what Lauren mentioned about trying to conceptualize and understand the few hours or what that would look like and how that training would be, and I'm not sure if it was Lauren or Kari that mentioned the fact that you would hate to rely on that, and then what if that wasn't right for you? I agree with what they have both said. It makes
Josh, you're our resident educator. You want to weigh in on this?
Yeah, well, I kind of question about the addiction counselors change. So they're essentially saying that the in-residence requirement could be fulfilled by an adjunct instructor that is located somewhere else other than the institution, as well as an agency supervisor. So like an agency supervisor that's teaching a course, or just through experience at a practicum site? What did that get discussed at all as to what that could look like for them?
I think they're including the agency where the internship is taking place. I believe that they're including them. But all of
Okay.
it, and something else I didn't add. So they have specific courses you have to do in residence. They have their practice courses, which include their practicum. Master's level psychology has to do their testing and their psychotherapy courses in residence. The rest can be done outside and online. So it's not all the coursework, it's only specific coursework.
Yeah.
But it has to be, the problem is when you have applicants, I'm not saying whether this is right or wrong, when you have an applicant, so if they only had 3 hours in testing at the institution, then they can't go somewhere else and make that up because it needs to be part of the program where they got their degree. And so that's part of what makes it more difficult, is even if they meet some of the requirement, there's no opportunity for them to make up the rest.
Leslie, am I right that this most often occurs with people who have gotten doctoral degrees online and have been unable to get licensed as a licensed psychologist, and so then have kind of rolled down to look to see if they were licensable as LMLPs?
Some of them, yes. Some of them, though, are master's level. Capella and Walden, and those are the main two, have master's level programs that they come from too.
Very good. Iris?
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is like, how often does that come up, and how many programs are like that? And it sounds like you're saying there's a couple that are most problematic with that.
Those are two of the bigger online programs that would be, I mean, they have, like, their counseling and MFT programs are both professionally accredited from those programs, but they're not, their doctoral programs are not APA accredited.
Mm-hmm.
So those are just the two biggest. There are others that have come through, but I couldn't name them.
Yeah, I mean, I have the same concerns that have already been mentioned, and I think that we've talked about before. I mean, there's certain things that you just are much more difficult to gain through doing online, and that you're going to miss versus in person.
I wanted to share just my position on it, I guess. I definitely am more towards the side of looking at how residency requirements could become more flexible or be lowered in some way, shape, or form. I agree that we have to be very careful of not lowering standards or not trusting the people that we are licensing per se. But at the same time, the need, it's no secret that especially in Western Kansas, you know, we have many what people refer to as mental health deserts. So being able to train people to serve those areas would be a big benefit. And for some people, that does not mean that they're ever going to be able to be on an on-campus residential program. So I think it's important to continue thinking about that, what that could look like, just because it is a challenge out here. And as Dave was saying, I mean, there are plenty of people in counties who need help where there's really not consistent or accessible help. And the other thing to bring up too, I know we've talked about it briefly here, but the APA is working on accrediting master's level programs. You know, one of my colleagues is on that board or something to try to help with that. I haven't gotten a real good indication with how far they are out from doing that, but that could kind of be like what counselors have with KCREP, you know, so that might be something that really throws whatever we talk about or decide here, you know, or the BSRB larger board decides, could throw just a major wrench into that. If Kansas went towards accreditation through the APA for master's level programs. So.
Thanks, Josh. And I think, Leslie, that the board actually likes it when there are national crediting bodies, because it then kind of evens the playing field, and it means that BSRB staff doesn't have to individually look at each of those people coming from outside the state, but it's a nationally accredited program that sets kind of a bar.
Mhm.
One question maybe for the group, is there an opportunity for flexibility where you've done your program elsewhere, it doesn't align specifically with the Kansas regs? Because I do know it's challenging. When I was lucky to go to a program in Kansas that designed the program around a way to meet all of the licensure requirements. But it always struck me as odd that if someone was moving to Kansas and there was an additional course that they needed to take, couldn't that be one option? So maybe this online degree is not enough, doesn't meet the bar, but could you do something in addition to that to give you that training experience and make, fulfill the requirements of the board, whether that be taking a in-person course at Washburn or one of the other programs?
Lauren, we had a student, and I'm curious about this too, as far as how that would transfer from the online to on campus, because we had a student who came to my program. I believe they were from somewhere up north, and their licensure was a different licensure, but they wanted to practice in the state of Kansas, and they didn't have the particular courses that Kansas requires. So they ended up taking the remainder of the courses through Washburn so that their license could indeed be, I'm going to say evolve into the LMLP. But they did take courses, and I don't know when it comes to especially those client facing courses like this psychotherapy and assessment courses, if that is something that we could look into where they may have to take additional, but perhaps they take like stats and, IO online, but then do the client facing one on site.
And Leslie, you spoke to a little bit of that. I think the requirement for those courses, the problem is that they have to be part of the program.
But I'm looking.
He definitely, he joined our program, so he was accepted into the program, this individual was. So he ended up joining the program as a whole. It wasn't just a sit in and take. So he actually ended up joining, and I think fell into technically the second year when he was joining. But that was a case that I clearly remember something occurring. And I don't know much about his program. I don't recall that now. It's been long enough, but
I'd have to review the whole reg, and it's pretty long, but I can get back to you with that.
Very good. And also, if people are licensed in another state, they can attempt to get licensed in Kansas through a reciprocity process, right, Leslie?
Yes.
And so if it is substantially equivalent, I believe is the language, the licensing requirements in the state that they were in to what Kansas has, is that kind of the criteria?
Yes, and it's been opened up quite a bit with
2066.
66, I was 2206, 2066. So there are, yes, actually the reciprocity laws are easier right now to get in if you're coming to Kansas, if you're physically coming to Kansas. Then reciprocity is there's a lot of options.
Do you want to touch on that briefly, Dave? If you can do so briefly.
I'll try. When I say 2066, I'm referring to a bill that passed the 2021 legislature. It was House Bill 2066. And it was a very, very complicated bill that was modified several times through the committee process. But the final version of the bill essentially was a bill not just for the BSRB, but for regulatory bodies in general in Kansas. That was calling for an expedited licensure timeframe for military members and military spouses. But it also included language to apply to individuals who intend to reside in Kansas or those that already reside in Kansas. So there's been a great deal of discussion about what intend to reside in Kansas really means. And so we've tried to modify things as best as we can. But essentially for those military members and military spouses, if we receive everything that is sufficient, we're asked to process those in 15 days, assuming that we receive a completed application packet where we have all the materials we need that would be required for licensure. And for the other individuals who would fit under that category of 2066, it would ask for an expedited time period of providing a license to them in 45 days. But there was other language that sort of set a different standard regarding looking at the scope of practice for what individuals were providing in other areas, other states. And then there was certain timeframes that they had to have practiced outside of Kansas first. That was a little different from what we had previously for reciprocity type situations. And so we're looking at things a little bit differently based on the guidance that we were provided from the passage of that bill. That's hopefully a short summary. It's much more complicated, and there are a lot of other items that were included in that bill that we're still working on fleshing out. Our primary focus was on what the bill required us to do. So there's language in there that talks about shall, but there's other items in the bill that we're still kind of working through in terms of it provided a framework for agencies to look at processes for emergency situations and things like that. So we're still working on some of those things, but in terms of the main requirements of the bill, it affected reciprocity applications, specifically military spouses, but also other categories of practitioners too. So we're tracking that information. The legislature is requiring us to report back on essentially how we're doing with the timeframes and if the bill was effective at doing different things. And so that's been one of the challenges we've been working with this year in regards to that bill.
So how about we'll table this, and Leslie will do some work on that regulation and get that information out to us. Is that okay with everyone?
Sure.
Very good. Our next item has to do with syncing expiration dates for holders of multiple BSRB licenses. I believe, and Leslie can correct me if I'm wrong, but about 10% of those individuals licensed by BSRB have more than one license, myself included. I'm so old, I was practicing before we were even licensed by BSRB. And the issue was around a request that if BSRB could sync those so that people's licenses came due at the same time. Much of that has to do with CEUs and being able to use the same CEUs instead of, if your licenses are a year apart, then some CEUs will count, others will not. Leslie, was I right? There's about 1,200 plus folks who are.
Yeah, it's about 8%, somewhere between 8 and 9%.
Thoughts on that?
There's
Go ahead.
currently, or there's over 14,000 licenses under the BSRB. So there's a little over 1,000 individuals who have more than one license under the BSRB, and some have as many as 3. So
I am supportive of syncing licensure expiration dates. Makes sense from an education perspective.
Yeah, me too. That would be really difficult if you had to get multiple year-to-year CEUs for 2 different licensures. It doesn't seem right.
I agree as well.
I agree. And I'm sure I asked 2 or 3 years ago now, maybe 4, I'm losing track, but when I got my LCP, that if it could come due as my LMLP, because it was, I don't know how to keep track of the CEUs for the LMLP on this cycle. And then these CEUs can cross over and also count under this cycle. It got really complicated. So I'm pretty sure it was approved, and I can renew them both at the same time. So I'm not sure, is that not standard right now? Because it's definitely if you have 2 and they're way off and they're not even close to being due at the same time.
yeah, and I can clarify that a little bit. In my time here, I've been trying to kind of look at our processes and try to work with our legal staff or legal counsel to verify, clean some processes up and make everything kind of sync up. So I think the issue is, at least in terms of our statutory ability, is that the statutes and regulations, they clarify the length of licensure. And so in order to sync up the expiration date, it would essentially be changing the length of licensure for one of the 2 licenses. And since we don't really have any language that allows us to provide a different period of time, with the one exception of all licensed psychologists renew in June of even numbered years. So that's a little bit different. But aside from that one profession, it's essentially a 2-year licensure period for the permanent licenses. And so looking at whether we could move forward granting any requests to sync them up, it would need for us to have the ability to provide a different length of time, at least on that initial licensure, so that, and it would also look at, could people give up, let's say, a few months to make sure that they are the same deadline, or at least the same month. And so that's kind of what we had worked with our legal team about, to see, can we do that? And I think the issue is without specific language, I'm not sure that we have the flexibility to do that going forward. So we, that was a request that the board had talked about in terms of looking at, the best method or one of the possible methods. Some of the other advisory committees had talked about perhaps allowing it as an option, so that if people wanted to do that, they could have that option, because there was some concern that perhaps not all practitioners would want the licensure bill to come up at the same time. Perhaps it'd be better for them if they were able to smooth it out and have it at different times of the year. But that's just one of the factors. So one of the items that other advisory committees have talked about is, if they were supportive of allowing this through a change to the statutes and regulations, perhaps allowing it as an option so that people could opt into it or make a request for it, versus it being standard for anybody when they get licenses.
I like that. So essentially people would have the option to renew one of their license early, so that they could self-synchronize, ultimately then being on a 2-year cycle from there.
Yeah, I think that would be the method that people have talked about probably the most. And so, from a technical standpoint, they would be, if we had this authority, it would be essentially giving up a certain period of their initial licensure period to have things be together. So we wouldn't be able to give anyone extra months to do that, but that's kind of how it would work.
So it's a perfect example of how somebody brings forward an idea that makes a lot of common sense, but then runs into some really technical challenges because of the way statutes and regs are worded, and not only that, but then the challenges it would then create depending on how we decided to do that for BSRB staff. As Dave mentioned, the licensed psychologists all come due at the same time. So instead of having that spread out over the year for staff, they know in that profession, every single person's license is going to come due in the same month, in the same year, which creates its own set of challenges. But again, and I'll speak for that group, some consistency across licenses allows for them to be able to plan and to accommodate those kinds of things. Whereas when everybody's doing it a little bit differently, it gets harder. So it sounds like this group would like for the LMLP, LCP voice on this to the full board to be, we would like that as an option for people if that's, if the board's able to figure out how to do that. Very good. Thank you. Any additional agenda items?
I had the one, Dave had answered that, the reason behind it, but I had the question of just, I was looking at doing a training and providing CEUs to staff here on ethics. And so I was looking into, you know, what do I have to show or do to make sure that they're counted as CEUs. And so when I looked into that, the only profession that had requirements of getting it pre-approved is social work. And so I was just asking the reason kind of behind that. Which I guess Dave said that it was the social work group that brought it up and then wanted it. I didn't necessarily feel like I needed anything. I just want to make sure that in providing CEUs that staff will get the CEUs, that there won't be a problem that comes up.
Yeah. Oh,
I was going to say, Leslie could probably explain some of the history of that and clarify.
Sure.
right. So yeah, the social workers wanted it, and I don't think the other professions were interested at the time. But if you put on a presentation and you have an agenda, learning objectives, if there's any question about what the training covered, or that it was, pertinent to master's level psychology, we would just ask for the agenda or the learning objectives, and it would be fine. Awesome. So there's no great, it's not a great process.
Okay.
Difficult.
No, I appreciate that. I just didn't know, how strict it was, but I already have all that kind of typed up and ready, so that if it was questioned, I have that ready to go. So
right.
Thank you.
Yeah, and it'll happen when they renew their license and they're audited. That's the only time it would come up.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So yeah, again, some professions add certain things, like some of the professions, in order to supervise people for advanced licensure, you have to be a BSRB approved supervisor in that profession. That is not true in ours or across all of them, but I know, what is it? Marriage and family therapists and counselors. Are there others? That's it. So
I think that's the two.
Yeah, sometimes groups bring those things out and say this is, and sometimes that comes from national groups that are moving in that direction. So we did not decide to do that. Anything else? If not, we'll look at a date for our next meeting. Does this particular day and time work for people? Thursday mornings, 10 to noonish.
I'll be starting here in a couple of weeks, 10 to 11 for the foreseeable future will be out for me, unfortunately. But, sorry.
Thursdays from noon to 2, like I can make anything work, but Thursdays from noon to 2, if that works better for folks, I can make that work too. If Thursdays work well.
Noon to 2.
I have class at 1:30, but we usually get done right about an hour and a half. If that's acceptable by the board. And only until next semester, I guess. Only until the end of the semester I would have that commitment. So
How about Lauren and Rebecca?
I can make it work if needed. I have a first Thursday of the month and noon to 1, but that I can't move, but I could send a delegate if needed.
And I can be pretty flexible as long as we've got a few weeks notice, I can step around. So
Yeah, and it doesn't have to be the first Thursday, does it, BSRB folks?
No, whatever works best for you. I'm looking at the calendar now. I don't believe we have very many of the advisory committees meeting on Thursdays. So, I think Thursdays are a pretty good day, whatever week looks best for you in terms of a standard meeting going forward.
How about the 13th of January?
And Dave, actually, the January is the month the board usually meets. So if you wanted to do the off months before board meetings, that would be in December or February.
How about February 10th?
That works for me.
Yep.
Oh.
That works for me.
February 10th is a Thursday.
And what time did we agree on?
Noon to 2.
Noon to 2.
Okay, so you're looking at your next meeting being February 10th, Thursday, February 10th from noon to 2?
Correct. All right. Unless there's something else, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Just before that, though, again, thank you all for your time today. Appreciate the opportunity to meet our new board members and look forward to getting to know you all a little better. Don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything I can do to answer any questions. Dave and his staff are really, really great at responding quickly to requests from advisory committee members, and we appreciate your willingness to serve in this endeavor.
Thank you all so much.
Now I'll take that motion.
So moved.
Second.
All right, so be it. Have a safe and great week, all.
Thanks, you as well.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.